Hey everyone, this is Live Entertainment. My name is Francisco Escobar, and welcome to Conversamos, where we have in-depth conversations about Latinidad and Abya. For this episode, we're going to discuss about the Puerto Rican diaspora, and with our first question, what does it mean to be Puerto Rican?
For me, being a Puerto Rican, like it's more like it's just that pride of history that I have, like coming from the island here to the United States. So I think like I have both sides of like how like the both perspective of people from the island and people from the diaspora, like how like they miss the island and leaving their families and all that. Um, but yeah, it's been like it's a hard change, but it's anything you have to work for, like este la patria, como se dice.
Good evening. Hola a todos. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Okay, great. So my name is Aurora Santiago Ortiz, and I am a PhD candidate in social justice education at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. I am from Puerto Rico. I grew up here, but I've been in the diaspora for the past 6 years. And I basically grew up back and forth between New York and Puerto Rico. So I have a very in between liminal kind of experience of being in both places. I'm currently in Manatí in Puerto Rico. I am doing my dissertation research here in Puerto Rico. And I have a law degree from the University of Puerto Rico School of Law. And my research focuses on community-based participatory action research methodologies, feminist methodologies, and also looking at how solidarity is a form of resistance and anti-colonial practice within that community-based research. And what was the question? What do I like about being Puerto Rican? Or
It's like, what would be like a spotlight of Puerto Rico that you
Yeah, I think we're incredibly resistant. Like our existence is based in resistance. So I think that being able to still be here after everything, and everything meaning, more than 500 years of colonialism, plus natural disasters, plus government disasters, is really a testament to the level of resistance. I don't like to use the word resilience because it's kind of been co-opted. But I think that we are definitely very resistant, and we're still here.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nicole Olivieri Pagan. I'm originally from Puerto Rico, but I'm currently living in Florida, in Gainesville. I have a master's in experimental psychology. I just graduated in May, and
Yay.
Thank you. And I've been living outside of Puerto Rico for about 5 years. That's definitely influenced a lot of my concentrations. I've concentrated a lot in my studies on social justice issues, on differences in race, acculturation, colorism, featureism, things like that. And I've taken upon myself to use what I've learned to ensure that I learn about my history as well as a Puerto Rican, not just the US and how things work here, but also to figure out how those things contrast with Puerto Rico and how they're similar, because a lot of the problems, they're rooted in colonialism, not just over there, but over here as well. So a lot of what I want to do is to continue concentrating on what I've been studying so that I can continue to learn everything I can. And hopefully one day I can use that to better my community in some way, because all I feel for Puerto Rico is love. And right now there's so much going on, and, people in diaspora, we just wish that we could be there and help out, but there's not a lot we can do from so far away.
Nice to meet you all. I'm Gabriel Omar Camareno Soto. I am a college student in the University of Puerto Rico, Rio Piedras campus. I was born and raised in Rio Piedras. I still live in Puerto Rico, and my plans are to stay there. I want to be a doctor, so my first option for med school is Recinto de Ciencias Médicas in San Juan, But my family, after Hurricane Maria, moved to Austin, Texas. I'm currently here with them, spending some time. And it's also an option for me to continue my studies here in Austin, Texas, because most of the med schools here are the cheapest in the country. But I definitely have had an incredible journey in my bachelor's degree. I'm going on my 4th year. I have been, when I was a freshman, the first thing that happened in Puerto Rico was Hurricane Maria. We got then our tuition doubled. Then the earthquakes, and now coronavirus. It has been an incredible journey. We've seen better days, but I want to someday become a professional and make Puerto Rico a better place. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Good evening. My name is Roberto Sorio. I'm actually an educator here in New York City. I've been in education for over 20 years. I opened up my own school, and now I currently work with English language learners. Actually, most of them newly arrived from the Dominican Republic. My roots to Puerto Rico, obviously through my mom and my dad. I was born here and raised in the Bronx. My mom and my father were from Mayagüez in Puerto Rico. I have a tremendous extended family that comes from Puerto Rico. And I could say that out of that extended family, only one is left on the island. Everybody else is scattered all over the United States. They're in Massachusetts, they're in Texas, they're in Virginia, they're in Florida, they're in Louisiana. They were all professionals, doctors, architects, chemists, all that were in Puerto Rico. And in reality, the majority of them had left before Maria, simply because of the economic downturn and the lack of economic opportunities for professional class in Puerto Rico. It's extremely sad, but one thing I have to say is that over the past 3 years, I've tried to really kind of immerse myself in my culture as a Boricua, and I've talked to a lot of different types of Boricua just to try to figure out, like, aside from doing my studies, why are we all where we are as an island? And the answers are very interesting. They range from, that we've had men of service, military men that have died, and, we deserve to be a state. We can't be a nation because they're afraid of communism. It's been a very, very interesting journey. But I think someone said it before, it's rooted in colonialism, and even more so in the abuse of the United States once they took over from Spain.
How would you describe your Puerto Rican identity and the relationship you have with the island?
For me, like, my Puerto Rican identity is like my biggest thing. Everyone I know, all my friends here, like everyone I met, the first thing I say, like, oh, I'm Puerto Rican, all that. It's like that sense of like patriotism that we have. I feel like it's big, and it's getting bigger every time like big things happen. Like we win the Olympics in tennis. We win in boxing, all that. Like it's something like it's big for us, and for me, it's something that like I'm proud to have. Everywhere I go, I say I'm Puerto Rican. Everywhere I go, I say I'm Latino here in the U.S. And that's like, even though we have the U.S. citizenship, it's like I'm not considered an American. I'm considered Puerto Rican. And that's something I value a lot. But yeah, like. With my island, I feel like I visit there every like break I have. All my family's there, all my friends from high school is there. So it's something that like I really take close to. Like in my house here, like to have like many like pictures and all that. So like it kind of like reminds me of home, all that. But yeah, it's something that when you move, no matter if it's from the US to another country, like it's something you're supposed to have. Like it's like that pride you have, and it's no matter if it's a picture, a postcard, or like some art, it's something that you value a lot. And yeah, that's just me.
Hard. But being someone that has lived both outside and in the US, it really does kind of shift the way that you see the archipelago, right? Because Puerto Rico is not just one island; it's various islands, and sometimes we tend to forget the people in Vieques and Culebra, and they're also, you know, island municipalities. And I think once you leave, you get the sense of nostalgia that you have to preserve your traditions through food, through music. It's very noticeable, right? But I'm back home, and I think that in Puerto Rico right now, and I think that it's right now we're going through a point in our own sense of like national identity where we're reckoning with a legacy of anti-black racism. And I think that now we're starting to have conversations that are starting to kind of break down the myth of racial harmony, which has been really emphasized from when you're born. And you really do see, you know, your family tells you about improving the race, and like you see it in a lot of different traditions and a lot of different things, like, you know, with hair, etc. So I think that we have a very complicated identity. We have a very complicated culture. I think that we haven't really gotten to delve in as like national discourse about the not so great things, right? Having to do with you know, machismo, the femicides, race. So I absolutely love being from here. I would not want to be from anywhere else. But I think that having these hard conversations is really important in terms of facing our own past and moving forward into something that's more kind of reflects the truth in what has been and what has happened in our past.
It's so complex, just as Aurora said. It's something that I have been exploring for a very long time. I've been evolving in views of what my identity as a Puerto Rican is, especially with, you know, studying. I've learned a lot of different things about the way things work, and it's made me change my perspective. I would say that I identify as mixed and white passing, racially ambiguous, and that has provided me with a lot of privileges within Puerto Rico. And outside of Puerto Rico, it has also provided me with privileges and shortcomings. And that is a very complex situation, and there is a lot of exploration that we as a community need to be able to do. And there's a lot of difficult questions that we need to ask ourselves if we want to move forward together. And there's a lot of barriers that we need to actively work to break down. And I feel like part of our identity is having to face our shortcomings and our differences and the disparities within our community, and to be able to together try and work through that, because we're a collectivist culture. And if we truly want to be a collectivist culture, we need to see our own identity as something we need to improve upon.
So my mother, her father was a Puerto Rican of Irish descent. She was abandoned by her mother because the mother, you know, she had my mother at an early age, and so she was really raised by her aunt, who was an older woman at that point in time. But I guess my point is that her father was a Puerto Rican man of Irish descent. On my father's side, that's Africa all the way. My grandfather came from Loíza, and then he moved to Mayagüez when he became a professor. And all that to say is that from there, once my mom and my dad got married and met, and they traveled over here to the States, they had me and my brother, and we basically grew up as what is called as New Yorkers, you know, with connection to the island, which was limited in the sense, well, I shouldn't say that, limited in the sense how, you know, how many times we traveled there or spent time there. But over here, we were immersed in the culture, you know, with the salsa parties, you know, everybody talking Spanish around us. So as, you know, we had to respond in Spanish to make sure that we, you know, we kept our language and things of that nature. That said, you know, that also brings about division sometimes, right? Because he's not really Puerto Rican, he's from over there, you know. Or, you know, I committed the cardinal sin of, and that was it. It was a wrap. You're not Puerto Rican. You don't eat beans. Forget it. You're not Puerto Rican. So it's very interesting. But like somebody else said, I've never really identified myself as European or as African or as Black. I'm Boricua. I'm Puerto Rican. Take me as I am, and that's basically it. But it's a beautiful compilation of different cultures and races and religions. It's actually an extremely beautiful thing, and that's why that's why I like when I go to Puerto Rico. When I meet people from other places that actually embrace the island and embrace our culture, I love that. I love that so much. It's the coolest thing for me.
I was gonna
go ahead.
I was gonna comment on something that you said, actually, Roberto, that I think it is very true about how Puerto Ricans in the archipelago see Puerto Ricans as outside, right, from the diaspora, and there has been kind of that tension, right, in terms of who is real, who is the real Puerto Rican. And it's sad because obviously, and I think a lot of it is, and especially in the terms of like thinking about New Yorkerness, a lot of it is actually rooted in anti-Blackness. Because when I arrived to Puerto Rico, back from New York when I was 13, I got teased at school all the time for acting right hip hop or for being a certain way, and that is actually completely tied to anti-Blackness. I think that those conversations are also not really explored. And I think that there needs to be, and I think after Maria, we did see a lot of those bridges being built between the diaspora and the islands down here. And I think that needs to keep going, not just in times of crisis or times of like a natural disaster and emergency, but also like even with the Ricky Renuncia protest last year, the diaspora was very involved. Like we were like looking at all the Facebook lives, we were super involved. So I think that we should be having more of these conversations and to build the bridges between the people who are in the diaspora, because we're getting evicted from the islands. Like people are leaving, right? Since, the last 10 years, more than, 300,000 people have left. There's been like a significant population decline. So we do need to be having these conversations. And I appreciate sharing that space with you, Roberto. And thank you, Francisco, for bringing us all together. I just wanted to respond to that and thinking of us, that binary, right? That kind of dichotomy.
Like I said, I was born and raised in Puerto Rico. I don't have any issues with my identity. I can see how other people who have been born in other places with Puerto Rican parents can have some identity issues, but at least me, I don't have them. In terms of my relationship with the island, I love my island. It's a part of me. I've had a couple chances to move to the States, and I have refused them, mainly because I want to be, I don't know, I'm attached to the island. I guess sometime in the future I will have to go, but I would always love to come back and live here. So yeah.
What is your knowledge of Pedro Bizo Campos, the Young Lords, and Oscar Lopez? And the reason why I'm asking this is because the way we interpret or receive information may come in with different understandings of it.
Starting with Pedro Bizo Campos, for me, even when I started studying Puerto Rican history in Puerto Rico, he was my biggest role model. That's the reason he's one of the figures that I pursued the field in government and politics. Just him like moving the masses in Puerto Rico and just like being pro-independence in an era where like it was still like controversial, because it's been controversial ever since El Grito de Lares and all that. Like people being afraid of independence, and him as a figure who studied in the U.S. in Harvard, he was a U.S. soldier, and then he comes to Puerto Rico like being pro-independence. Like he was a really smart person. Like that's why people in Puerto Rico call him El Maestro, because he he taught a lot, like for the people. Like he knew what he was saying. It's not like, and part of my like phrases, but it's not like current politicians in Puerto Rico who don't know what they're doing. For me, Don Albizu is like more like, he was advanced to his era. He was a very intellectual man. He knew like 5-6 languages at the time. So he's not a dumb person. He's not a stupid terrorist that like most people said. Like he knew what he was saying. And
it's funny because a lot of these individuals who they were so influential within Puerto Rico, they are names that you cannot mention in my household in front of my father. Which is funny because he's Puerto Rican. And it goes to show that a lot of Puerto Ricans, they see individuals who were socialist, who worked towards Puerto Rico's betterment and had very radical ways of thinking as terrorists, basically. And that's interesting because I've seen in the younger generations that has changed drastically. And I think it has a lot to do with the way perceptions change over the years. Oscar Lopez is another one who a lot of older generation Puerto Ricans will tell you he was a terrorist and he should have been, like, he should have stayed in prison forever. But a lot of people from the younger generation see him as a hero. And there are some individuals who are from the older generation that do see these individuals who were leaders and activists as heroes, but for the most part, they're seen as terrorists. And I think that's very interesting, the generational changes that have taken place in the perceptions of individuals who have been activists and leaders with radical thinking in Puerto Rico.
So I'm sorry I didn't hear what Nicole said prior, but in terms of Albizu Campo, I come from a family that was pro-independence. My mother was actually blacklisted by the Puerto Rican government, and in terms of like being followed and being surveilled, and she had her file actually returned in 2001 when the government started to, obviously they admitted that they were doing phone tappings and were doing surveillance in the 80s, but then after a huge lawsuit, people started to get their files back. So I grew up, understanding that, he was this like mythological figure, but it's complicated because you grew up like thinking that nationalism is a good thing, right? And if you think about it in the context of the U.S., and it's a very different vision of nationalism, right? Because we don't actually have political independence. We hold on to the notion of nationalism. So Albizu was in the Nationalist Party, and he was a very charismatic person. I then grew to understand that he was not perfect either, but he's become like larger than life, a very mythological figure, especially because he was murdered, and the radiation treatments that he got in the hospital, he was basically tortured. And in terms of Oscar he's actually from my dad's hometown of San Sebastián in the western part of Puerto Rico, and obviously like I grew up knowing that he was a political prisoner. And he was part of this clandestine group, and was blamed for all these bombings. But he actually, and I don't know if y'all know that he was actually pardoned by Clinton, and he declined the pardon, so he stayed in prison for a lot longer. So these are all figures interesting because we focus a lot in our historiography, like in our kind of education of what these people were doing. We focus on men. These figures were mostly male, even though there are women that were, doing the work. And in terms of the Young Lords, I love the Young Lords because I think, and I study their work actually, because they did a lot of direct action, a lot of community-based work in New York in a time where, in the Bronx and in Washington Heights, but especially in the Bronx, they were completely forgotten and ignored by the city government, and they, their programs that fed people that were based also on the Black Panthers program, they got a lot done. And I think that they're very important because they also were able to go into coalition with other groups such as the Black Panthers and the Young Patriots. And they also were very, they got a lot of heat for not centering women, and then women in the organization put also gender equity at the forefront, and I think that's very important. So to me, these were all figures that I kind of grew up, knowing about, but now I focus a lot on the young lords.
Thank you. And Roberto?
So that's interesting, right? Because I come, going back to identity real quick, I come from a family that's a very proud family. And that's the way that I was brought up. You're an Sorio, you're Puerto Rican, and that attitude has taken me a very long way in my life. And it's an attitude of independence, to be honest with you. But that said, I wasn't brought up by my family to know about these people. I really wasn't, right? I was brought up to be proud. I was brought up to be who we were and to let nobody step on us. But I was never taught about them. I started to learn about Pedro Albizu Campos in college. At the very beginning, this wasn't just a simple man. This was a complex, very intellectual, very academic man that really knew how to do things and how to organize and how to bring people together. And then that leads me to the young lords, right? Because the young lords, I basically started to connect with the young lords in the 90s. I used to run a violence prevention program. And Felipe Luciano used to come and talk to my kids. And he really formed a bond with one of them, and they became personal friends. But what was amazing about the young lords is the one thing that I think that Puerto Rico has to do now, which has been taken away from it, which is sustainability. You have to be able to sustain yourself, and that's what the young lords were able to do when Boricuas in the Bronx and in Spanish Harlem were, like you said, they did not have the basic services. They didn't have sanitation, they didn't have food, they didn't have police services, any of those things. And that's what the young lords were able to bring to their community. So one thing that I support now with Puerto Rico is that, from what I've learned, is that it relies on food. 98% of its food is imported. That's crazy. If something worse than Maria would have happened, I would say, how long does the island have before the people start to starve? If they can't get food, basic food in. So now I love the fact that there are all these organic growers, there are all these collectives in Puerto Rico that are trying to bring back agriculture to PR. But again, that just goes back to sustainability, and that's what those two particular individuals for me, or the group and Pedro Albizu Campos, that's what they meant to me, being able to be for yourself.
Thank you. And last off with Gabriel.
Pedro Albizu Campos to me is like one of the biggest figures in Puerto Rico politics. But you guys have all told basically who he is. What I would like to point out is that I don't know him because of the education system in my country. I know him because I read books, and yeah, at least before college, I don't think we mentioned a lot about him, even though he's such a big figure in my country. So that is interesting to observe. Oscar Lopez is another one that was not mentioned in my school. I know a little about him, would like to know more, about the organization he was part of. But like someone said earlier, the younger generations are not calling him like straight up terrorist. Like, at least I'm glad to know that my mind is open to at least get to know him before saying all those things. And I know him and Pedro Albizu Campos mostly from two books: Puerto Rico en el siglo americano, su historia desde el 1898, and War Against All Puerto Ricans, two very good books. About the young lords, didn't really know them before I saw the questions. I searched a little about them, and they are like another organization, really interesting, their ideals, and yeah, I will try to study them. Thank you.
And continuing with this conversation of independence, what are your views of Puerto Rico being a Commonwealth, a statehood, and independence?
Yeah, that's my favorite question. Like it's so general, but it's the number one question that every Puerto Rican is asked. You know, I'm gonna tell you two different stories. The first one was when I was younger, when I was studying Puerto Rican politics, when I was still in Puerto Rico in high school and all that. I was very like pro-independence. I was really sure. I knew like I wanted to like end colonialism, all that. Like it's like because you learn about the history and you're like, oh, like what is this? Like that's not fair. Like what happened to Albizu, but how like the governments back from like 1952 with Luis Muñoz Marin and like all the like former governors, like how they manipulated the people to like vote for their party or for their ideology, plebiscites. So yeah, like that was really mad at the history and all that. But then again, like I kept growing, I kept studying, I kept learning more, going more in depth. I've made like various projects, research projects, term papers, like a lot of stuff about Puerto Rico. And going more in depth throughout my years, I've learned that like yeah, the end goal is the independence, but as of right now, like because of the governments that we have, the corrupt governments, is not the ideal path. And I mentioned more for myself. In order to have a complete stable country, a complete stable government, there needs to be good people there. There needs to be people who know what they're doing. There needs to be people who actually have a background in the field and is not in that position because I got this because the governor is my friend. No, like in order for a functioning status, that there has to be people who work well and who knows what they're doing inside the government. And that's why for now, I would say like I would like Puerto Rico to become independent. I believe Puerto Rico can be independent, but there has to be a transition period. That's why like I'm studying politics, I'm studying government. I'm here in DC, which is basically like where the sovereignty of Puerto Rico rests in the U.S. Congress. Yeah, it's something that we have to sit down with the federal government and just to negotiate what do we want to be, if we want to be statehood, Commonwealth, or independence. And all three status are viable according to the U.S. federal government. And there's one more, which is the Treaty of the Free Association, which is the status that I favor as a transition to independence.
I also believe in independence. I think that what we're seeing is that, well, obviously the U.S. does not want us as a state. That we do know. And if we were to become a state, we would be poorer than the poorest state, which I think is Mississippi. I think that the current system we have is obviously not working. It's, just another word for a colony. We're in deep financial ruin, and that has a multiplicity of factors. Corruption being one of them, colonialism being another one of them. I think that in the question that came before, it's interesting because you saw a lot of this like really big movement, a lot of political turmoil and activity happening in the 20th century, in the 30s, in the 50s, in the 70s in the U.S. And that has really died down because the U.S. has made it its job to really amedrentar, to really discourage and to scare people off into doing kind of actions for independence. And people got obviously very, very scared. I also think that nationalism as we know it is shifting. I think the discourses are changing. And I think that if we can probably in another question, I can also talk about that a little bit. But I think that people are tired of the same three things. Like, what are we going to be? I think people are a lot more worried about like very urgent issues, concrete issues, the fact that there is hunger, the fact that half of the people in Puerto Rico are under the rate of poverty, the fact that we have, large scale corruption. Corruption is completely normalized, from having your friends occupy positions to taking, contracts under the table to paying exorbitant amount of monies for positions, and basically it's theft, right? So I think that obviously, statehood will never happen. The way things are is completely unsustainable. I think that we've seen that. We've seen the collapse of the associated free state as we know it. It does not work.
I could talk about this for an hour. I think the debate of statehood, colony versus independence is very interesting. One thing I noticed a few weeks ago, I was reading this, it was basically an autobiography of someone who is from Hawaii, talking about how he dealt with a lot of loss of land and how he dealt with a lot of cultural loss, and how a lot of the generation before him, they dealt with a lot of issues around losing land, poverty, losing language, and having a lot of individuals from the US move in on Hawaiian territory to the point where Native people don't have access in the way that they should to their own land. And I felt like every paragraph that passed by, I was reading something from Puerto Rico. And the crazy thing is that I feel the desire for statehood is connected to the desire to be a true American. And I feel there is a very complicated root to that. And that is also anti-Blackness, anti-independent island, because a lot of Puerto Rico wants to be more European. So because we want to be European, we desire to be more American, which is as close as we can get to being European. And I feel that the desire to continue to be a colony is rooted in fear of change. There is a fear of becoming a state. What would that look like? There's a fear of what would independence look like. People who want to be a colony, to continue being a colony, can't picture what the difference would be. So it's basically a desire to stay in the status quo. I feel that Puerto Rico has the strength to be independent. We need a plan. We need to be able to figure out how we will be able to change the system so that we can gain independence. But there's a lot of work to be done in that sense. But nothing else has worked. As Aurora said, statehood wouldn't work. There's no way that the US wants us to be a state. I think that the only way they would allow us to be a state would be if, similar to Hawaii, Puerto Ricans would not have access to their own land.
I believe in independence, but just as Carlos said, right, we need a kind of a transition to independence. If we were just to become independent, I think that would be a disaster. Again, we can't even feed ourselves. So could you imagine us being an independent country? But as we work towards that independence, it goes back to what Aurora said, right? The conversation is changing, right? And I think that the plebiscite, the talk about, statehood, the talk about sovereignty, and the talk about associated state, I call that an okie doke, a political okie doke. Go look over there while they're just, being corrupt and stealing all the resources and all the funding that should go to the people, should go to the towns, should go to the municipalities. And everybody's focused on that conversation. That's changed, right? Now, like I said, people are trying to feed themselves. There's plenty of up and coming, small businesses that are trying to make it happen in Puerto Rico. And I think that's what we need to build on. On top of that, it goes to show how everything connects, right? There's no reason why we should be using any type of fossil fuels in Puerto Rico. Not one. We have every single natural possible resource on that island. We have sun, we have wind, we have geothermal, we have solar, we have it all, right? So you take that out, now you're talking about an abundance of money that could be used again to build on the country and to build on nationhood.
Thank you. And Gabrielle?
This question is really, there's a lot to say about this. It's really complicated to me. But I think what is clear is that we need a change. The Commonwealth we're living right now is just a colonial status that needs to change. It isn't a happy medium between statehood and independence. We have been stripped off our land and our money for years. So we need to change what to do. I think at least I don't want statehood because of all the history, the dirty history I have read and learned about how the United States has treated Puerto Rico. Like, my sense of pride as a Puerto Rican doesn't allow me to just be comfortable with just being a state and feeling a part of them, because they don't want us. Like, they have been using us for years. And yeah, I would also like to see my country independent. We have a lot of resources. We can improve our agriculture. We can improve our tourism. We need to eliminate corruption. All those things are necessary. And if that process, like, we get to do all that, we can be successful as independent. So that's my opinion. Thank you.
For our next question, how would you foresee solidarity between the two Puerto Rican populations leading into the 21st century?
We're facing a very complicated time. And I think that, you know, the hurricanes, I say hurricanes because Irma was there too, right next to Maria, but Maria especially. The earthquakes, there's actually been like 3 earthquakes since we've been talking, larger than 3.0 to 3.5 as we've talked. I keep getting alerts from my phone. I think that we need to be having conversations like these to really bridge and know what's happening, because I think that there tends to be sometimes a lot of disconnection. And for example, I'll even just mention within academic spaces, a lot of the knowledge that is produced in Puerto Rico does not even reach the US, right? And it seems to be like a big oversight. And likewise, a lot of the stuff that's being produced in Puerto Rican communities, a lot of the research that's done does not reach Puerto Rico either. So I think that there needs to be larger pathways of communication and of exchange, because we're and as I said, we're facing a lot of difficulty, right? We have a junta that's imposed on us, unelected fiscal control board, imposing austerity measures that are threatening public universities, teachers' pensions. So there's so much going on. Having minimum wage at $7.25 an hour, young people cannot make it on that salary. It is just unsustainable, right? And as Roberto said, we import something like 85% of our food. But there's an issue, right? We have Monsanto here. Monsanto makes it impossible for small agricultural workers to actually make a living. So there's so many challenges ahead that I think that, and as I said earlier, what happened in the summer was such a great moment for Puerto Ricans in the diaspora and here to like come together. And I've seen that happen, right? But I think that we do need to look at hard conversations, complicated conversations, and not, look at it as, oh, we're going to unite and everything is going to be great. Because there's a lot of colonial trauma that's behind relationships. And I think that we do need to start having those conversations, because what's happening here, and like Nicole said, there's a lot of parallels with Hawaii. There is a lot of dispossession happening here. People are being forced to leave, and U.S. companies are setting up shop here. We have a place like Old San Juan where Airbnb there's 33% of the properties are Airbnbs in Old San Juan. So there's a lot of dispossessing, a lot of eviction, a lot of forced migration, which basically U.S. companies want Puerto Rico to be empty of Puerto Ricans. And so did Ricky Rosselló's government, as we saw in the Telegram scandal. They want to see a Puerto Rico without Puerto Ricans. And I think we got to start talking about what that looks like to counter that, right? And what does solidarity actually look like, right, in practice? So I think like just having these conversations, how do I foresee solidarity? I think social media is super powerful. I think that we need to continue to build those bridges and to have these kinds of conversations and to actually set up networks. And there are already existing networks, but really tap into them and to keep strengthening them so we can, because we got a lot of work ahead, especially in this election year. And to me, honestly, something like a plebiscite, I agree with Roberto, it is a waste of money. And they just passed a new civil code here, which is completely unclear what is actually happening, and that's what the government wants, to not tell us what's actually going on and to set up a lot of confusion. And that goes along with the shock doctrine. When there's moments of chaos, that's when the government comes in and imposes its most neoliberal policies.
I think that the most important thing that those of us who are living outside of the island need to do is ensure that Puerto Rico is a voice that is collectively heard, because there's a lot of media that they take away our voices. They speak for us. They speak for our community. They say how our social structure works. They don't know how our social structure works, but they base it off of what they observe. We need to make sure that our voices are not being silenced by them. We need to make sure that we are telling the stories of our people back on the island, and we are making sure that there is positive change going on. We need to make sure that people are aware of what is being falsely said and what the truth is. I think that that's the most important thing that we need to address here in the diaspora, especially those of us who are in more privileged positions. We need to ensure that we use our privilege to speak for our people. And I think that's the simplest way to put it.
So something that Aurora said and that struck me is that they've tried to have a Puerto Rico without Puerto Ricans since the United States took over. They were trying to get rid of us, right? There's a part in the War Against Puerto Ricans where they talk about, I think it's Sloan, I forget the name of the doctor, that he was actually doing the experiments on Pedro Albizu Campos. And there's a letter that he writes where he talks about, oh, this would be a beautiful island if it wasn't for the Puerto Ricans. So this is something that we've been fighting since the beginning of American colonialism. Now, the other day I was at a BLM rally, and I live upstate in New York. My town is mostly white, and it's been, this rally was a big issue of contention. And when I went to the rally, it was beautiful. It was beautiful. You had people of different races. You had people of different ages, different creeds, different colors talking. But the one thing that everybody agreed upon was that it was being led by the youth. It was put together by an 18-year-old girl. And she got over 100 people there from this small little white town, right, that was mostly against it. And the reason I say that is because one thing that I shared with them, though, was that they can't do it without us, and we can't do it without them. And I think it goes back to what Nicole was saying, right? It has to be like the people that left Puerto Rico to come to the United States before everything was going haywire came to the United States to, like most immigrants, right? To build and so that the next generation has better opportunities. And that's exactly what happened with me. With my parents were, my dad was a factory guy first. My mom worked her way up through, to become an administrator in education. But she got me in a college education, and I took it to the next level. And that's what I'm doing with my kids. And the reason I say that is because we are going to need, I believe, that we're going to need the people in the Puerto Ricans in Diaspora to come back, right? To come back. And like you said, they're buying up, Puerto Rico. No, let us from the Diaspora buy up Puerto Rico. That's what I plan to do. I mean, that's how I plan to use my money, right? I'm going to go buy property, right? And give it back to my people. I'm starting an organization, right, where I basically want to create housing for veterans. And what you have to understand is that everything that I think about is strategic, right? One of the biggest supporters of the statehood movement in Puerto Rico are veterans. And you have to understand why. It makes sense, right? But they're also the ones that are being shafted by the government. So, why don't we in the Diaspora who have made good of ourselves come back and invest and take back Puerto Rico. I think that that's how it has to be done. There's no other way that it's going to work, because if we stay here and concern ourselves with us over here, that doesn't help Puerto Rico. And then the people on the island, they have their own problems. That's not help. But together, it could be something very special.
I see the relationship between the Puerto Rican populations, the one in the island and the one in the diaspora. They're gonna be improving. I think we just saw that with the last protests of Ricky Renuncia. I think social media is a great tool for all these movements, and I just would like for the people in the diaspora to know that they have an effect on these movements, and to be motivated to help, because you guys can help. And I want people in the island to not feel alone. We got a lot of people out there who cares for us, and yeah, I would like to keep improving that relationship.
I know that in a presidential report in 2006 from the Puerto Rico Task Force in the White House, it says that the Congress has the power to do anything concerning Puerto Rico. If they want to sell Puerto Rico to China, for example, they can, because Puerto Rico is a property of the U.S. And going to that tangent, I feel like I can see that we need the Puerto Ricans in the diaspora and the Puerto Ricans in the island to work together, but not just in Puerto Rico, but in the Congress too. Like, we need to unite, because the one that has the soul and the full power of Puerto Rico is the U.S. Congress. So we need to take our message and we need to unite as both part of the Puerto Rican population to the U.S. Congress. Because I know, like, a few days ago, I saw that the population in Puerto Rico got lower now with COVID-19. It's now in 2.9 million, where in the U.S. it's now 6 million Puerto Ricans. So there you can see that there's more Puerto Ricans on the U.S. than in Puerto Rico. And that's where we need to know, every Puerto Rican that is in the U.S., they need to contact their representative. They need to ask them, what's your policy towards Puerto Rico? For the presidential debates, for the presidential candidates, what are your policies for Puerto Rico? And that's something that we need to focus on, not just enforcing our laws in Puerto Rico and making sure the local government is doing the job, but also what the higher authority, which is the U.S. Congress, it's doing to what laws are they doing to Puerto Rico that may or may not affect them.
With that said, that is all the time that we have. Thank you all for joining us. For everyone at home, make sure you like the video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on all our social media outlets at Latin_entertainment. Also, you can listen to us on our various podcast platforms that vary from Anchor, Spotify, Apple Music, and more. Additionally, check out our website for various features to promote the Latin American diaspora on Abya at www.latinentertainment.org. Stay tuned as we have more episodes ahead on this show, Conversamos.